The Embraer E2 family is a marvellous creation of Embraer, a well-known Brazilian aerospace company. Yet despite all these achievements, there is one area in which the E2 series has been lacking: its order book. But this might change sooner than later because the E2 outclasses its competitors in one important field and is ready to make a phenomenal comeback. So what changed? To understand this, we need to go back in time. Back in 2002, Embraer chose to build a larger regional jet. After seeing strong sales of their ERJ family in the 90s, they decided to compete with Canada's Bombardier. This would lead to the development and launch of Embraer's most successful jet till date, the E175. Fast forward to 2013, and Embraer announced that it was going to build a successor to their highly successful E-Jet at the Paris Air Show. This came as a bit of a surprise to many, since the E-Jet was still relatively young. However, Embraer didn't really have a choice. You see, around the same time, Bombardier developed the C-Series, which added market pressure to Airbus to develop its A320neo, and that pressured Boeing into developing the 737 MAX series. This big chain reaction caused by Bombardier ended up eventually with the Canadian aircraft manufacturer exiting commercial aviation. Their C-Series became the Airbus A220 that we all know well today, and is one of Airbus's top-selling aircrafts. But how does all of this tie into Embraer? Well, when Airbus took over the Bombardier's C-Series and began with the production of the A220, it forced Boeing and Embraer to pursue a merger to create its own fleet of regional jets. This move would eventually lead to the E2 program. However, this merger never happened. That is because Boeing walked away from the deal with Embraer at the height of the pandemic. It was likely the cause of the MAX C crisis that resulted in Boeing walking away from the deal after suffering from more than 1,000 cancellations of its MAX series. Fortunately, Embraer decided to push on with its E2 program, which is much more than a simple reiteration of its predecessor, the E-Jet. No, in fact, Embraer has stepped up its game and built upon the success of the E1 and designed the E2 jet to be a true champion in the regional jet category. You see, Embraer chose to optimize and improve the design of its predecessor, the E-Jet. It would focus on two key elements, making the E2s quieter and more efficient than any competitor in the field. And it shows. To start off, Embraer has kept the same fuselage, but instead have improved on the engines, landing gear and new wings, the latter being one of the most significant changes as well as one of the most controversial ones. You see, Embraer decided that each model of the E2 family has its own wing design, which is pretty unique because for most aircraft families, wings are standard across the aircraft type. But Embraer realized that it was important to design the most efficient wing for each member of the E2 family separately. This means that the E2 has 3 different wings, specifically designed and optimized for each individual E2 aircraft and its weight. The E2 new wing has the biggest aspect ratio and it's the longest wings for their aircraft size. To put this in perspective, the previous generation E-Jet, the E195, has a wingspan of 94 feet and 3 inches. Their improved E195 E2 jet has a wingspan of 115 feet and 2 inches, making it significantly larger. By focusing on improving on these features, Embraer produced what is probably the most environmentally friendly jet to date. But why go through all this effort? Well, according to Embraer, the longer wings will produce lower drag, and drag is inefficiency and noise. So by increasing its wingspan, they got the best fuel consumption you can get for their type of aircraft. It's pretty clever when you think about it. But they didn't stop there and revamped the engine as well. You see, the E2 is powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney PW1900G engines, and even though it uses the same heated turbofan engines as found on the Airbus A220, it is far more efficient with its thrust. That is because Embraer focuses on optimizing its design so that the thrust required from the engine is less, resulting in less fuel burn and less noise from the engines. So even though the A220 can fly farther, the E2 achieves a better fuel efficiency. As a matter of fact, the E2 has an improvement of 17.5% better fuel efficiency than its predecessor, the E1. This is an amazing improvement and shows Embraer's attention to detail. But despite the E2's outstanding features and advancements, its orders have been lagging behind. It's at a slower pace than it was with the E1, and it's not really a surprise when we look a bit closer. You see, Embraer is in a similar situation as Airbus was with the A330ceo and A330neo. That is because the replacement model, the E2 family, arrived on the scene sooner than its predecessor had aged out. But not only that, the Brazilian aircraft manufacturer is facing other challenges as well that adds up to the main issue. They're dealing with the US scope clause, which does not allow the E175-E2, the upgraded version of their most successful jet, the E175, to operate in US regional airlines. In fact, it's so bad that 0 E175-E2 models have been sold, and it seems that the plane is delayed till 2027. Then there is the failed deal with Boeing, which put Embraer directly up against Airbus. And then there is of course the pandemic, which had cut back the airline's fleet growth and renewals. It's no surprise then really that the E2 has grown slowly. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, and for that we need to go to the third busiest airport in Europe, Amsterdam Airport. Known as Schiphol to the Dutch, is one of Europe's busiest airports. It's a bustling hub of activity where planes take off and land like clockwork. It's home to KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, which operates the majority of the slots. Now imagine that clockwork disrupted, the rhythm broken. That's the reality we're facing today, as the Dutch airport is forced by the government to cut flights by a staggering 12% due to noise pollution and the climate agreement. This marks a significant turning point in the world of aviation, as it's the first time that a government forced a major airport like Amsterdam Airport to cut flights. Why is this relevant to the E2's comeback, you might think? Well, as you already know, the Embraer E2 has come with efficient upgrades that makes the E2 family the most environmentally friendly jet to date. However, there is one important field in which it truly stands out, and that is whisper-quiet operation. You see, noise pollution has become one of the biggest gripes of local communities living near airports. As more planes take to the skies, the noise levels have soared, as such organisations like the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, make the limitation of aircraft noise a high priority. That's why you have noise regulations which are certified by regulators like EASA and the FAA and are released in chapters. Back in 2008, the noise regulations was at Chapter 4. It demanded that aircrafts lower their noise levels by 10 EPN-dB, which stands for effective perceived noise in decibels. The E2 was always compliant with Chapter 4 from the get-go. However, that was not enough for Embraer, so they made sure that their E2 model was future-proof. So, when the new and current standard for new aircraft went up to Chapter 14, it shook things up a bit by requiring a further reduction of 7 EPN-dB. But as it turns out, the E2 had already met the standards for compliance without making any changes to the plane. The EASA and the FAA gave their seal of approval in August and October of 2020. This goes to show how meticulous the E2's design was, and it doesn't stop there. For example, by working their engineering wonders, Embraer managed to eliminate noise from the wheel well by adding a special cover. And guess what? This not only hushed the E2, but also improved its aerodynamics. Thanks to their attention to detail, Embraer has accomplished something very unique in the narrow-body market. It is officially the quietest single-aisle jet in the world. In fact, the E2 is so quiet that passengers requested the cabin crew to keep their voices down, as their conversations could be heard. It shows when compared to its direct competitor Airbus. When compared to the Airbus A220-300, the closest competitor, the E195-E2 is a whopping 11% quieter than the A220-300. The difference becomes even greater if we compare the E190-E2 against the A321. The E190-E2 measures 28% lower. But how does this benefit airlines? Well, for one, flexibility. Quieter planes open up new possibilities for airlines. City centre airports may be convenient for passengers, but they have strict noise control to keep everyone living in the city happy. Take London, for example, which brought an aircraft noise categorisation scheme in 2018 to limit the aircraft that fly there. And let's not forget Amsterdam Airport from earlier. They are forced to cut flights from the government because of noise pollution and the climate agreement. Which brings us to the final point, because as the world moves towards a more environmentally friendly place, the aviation industry needs to adapt as well. More and more cities and airports will put in restrictions, which forces airlines to look for the most efficient jets there are. Embraer has created the world's most efficient plane to date. Take this quote from Luis Carlos Alfonso, Senior VP Engineering, Development and Corporate Strategy at Embraer. In an interview with Simple Flying, he said, "Noise is energy, and a quiet plane is an efficient plane." It's quite logical when you think about it, but it's something that is often overlooked by nearly everyone but one. Currently, that is the E2, and it's all thanks to Embraer's overachieving standards to try and raise the bar. It's their attention to detail that will pay off much sooner than later.